The empress, who scorned 1,000 worlds, Empress Vexhara, stood upon the crystalline balcony of her flagship, watching the stars bend to her will. For 3 centuries, she had commanded the Nexari Empire, stretching across 47 star systems. Her silver skin gleamed under the artificial suns of her throne room, and her forearms moved with the grace of someone who had never known defeat. The Nexari were perfect beings. They lived for millennia, possessed telepathic abilities that could crush minds, and their technology made other civilizations look like children playing with sticks. Vexhara herself was considered the pinnacle of their evolution. Beautiful, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. "Another world has fallen, my empress," reported General Cawthron. His head bowed low. The Zelthans surrendered without firing a single shot. Vexhara's lips curved into a cold smile. Of course they did. No species with intelligence would dare oppose us. She turned to study the holographic display showing their latest conquest. "What news of the primitive worlds?" Earth continues to send their pathetic diplomatic messages, my empress. "They offer trade agreements and peace treaties." Vexhara laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in a winter storm. "Humans, such amusing little creatures. I've studied their history. They can barely manage their own planet. Yet they dream of negotiating with gods." She gestured dismissively. "Their lifespans are so brief. They're practically insects. What could they possibly offer us?" The bridge crew shared knowing looks. The empress had made sport of mocking human attempts at contact for months. Their simple language, their emotional responses, their fragile bodies, everything about them seemed designed to amuse her. "Shall we ignore them?" "Again, my empress." "No," Vexhara said, her eyes glittering with cruel delight. "I think it's time. We paid Earth a visit. I want to see these humans grovel in person. Perhaps we'll make them our latest entertainment." As the massive Nexari fleet changed course toward the small blue planet, none of them suspected that Earth held any surprises. How could it? The humans had no advanced weapons, no telepathic abilities, no technology that could threaten them. They were simply another primitive species to be conquered and forgotten. But somewhere on Earth, in a small apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Jake Morrison was working late into the night. The young engineer had been chosen by pure chance to be humanity's representative, not because he was the best or brightest, but because his name had been drawn from a lottery when all the professional diplomats had refused. What seemed like a suicide mission. Jake had no idea he was about to meet the most powerful being in the galaxy. He was just a regular guy who fixed satellites and had a habit of talking to his coffee maker when he got nervous. But sometimes, the most extraordinary things happen when ordinary people refuse to give up. Part 2. When Gods Meet Mortals. Nexari mothership descended through Earth's atmosphere. Like a falling star made of silver and nightmares, it was larger than most cities, its hull reflecting sunlight in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. As it settled into orbit above the Pacific, smaller ships detached like droplets of liquid metal, heading for the coordinates they had been given. Jake Morrison stood on the designated landing platform, wearing his only good suit and trying not to throw up from nerves. The United Nations had given him exactly 3 pieces of advice. Be respectful, don't start an interstellar war, and try not to die. He was pretty sure he was already failing at the first one, considering he'd spent the morning arguing with his alarm clock. The Nexari shuttle touched down without a sound, its surface rippling like disturbed water before solidifying into stairs. Jake had seen the videos, read the briefings, but nothing had prepared him for the moment when Empress Vexhara emerged. She was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure, tall as a basketball player, with silver skin that seemed to glow from within, forearms that moved in perfect coordination, and eyes like captured starlight. Her flowing robes shifted colors as she moved, and the very air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. Behind her came an entourage of equally impressive beings, each one looking like they could bench press a small building. Jake suddenly felt very aware of his coffee-stained tie, and the fact that he'd gotten his haircut at a place called Snip and Save. "So," Vexhara said, her voice carrying easily across the platform despite the wind, "you are humanity's chosen representative. She looked him up and down like she was examining a particularly unremarkable bug. How quaint. Jake cleared his throat. Welcome to Earth, Your Imperial Majesty. I'm Jake Morrison, and I'm honored to meet you. Vexhara's laugh was like breaking glass. Honored? Oh, little human, you should be terrified. Do you know how many worlds have knelt before me? How many species have begged for mercy, actually? No, Jake said, his nervousness making him blunt. The briefing packet was pretty light on the genocide statistics. The Nexari entourage stiffened. Several hands moved to weapons. General Cothran stepped forward, his face dark with anger, but Vexhara raised one of her hands to stop him. You dare speak to me with such casualness? She asked, but there was something almost curious in her tone now. Jake shrugged. I don't really know how else to speak. I'm just a guy who fixes satellites. They picked me out of a hat because everyone else was too smart to volunteer for this job. For the first time in 3 centuries, Empress Vexhara found herself genuinely surprised. The art of being wonderfully wrong. Vexhara had expected groveling. She had expected tears, desperate pleas for mercy, perhaps some primitive offering of gold or livestock. What she had not expected was for Jake Morrison to offer her a tour of the local coffee shop. It's not much, Jake said, walking beside the most powerful being in the galaxy like they were old friends. But they make a decent latte, and the Wi-Fi's pretty good if you need to check your spacey mail or whatever. The Empress found herself studying this strange human with growing fascination. He showed no fear, no awe, no recognition of the vast gulf between their species. Either he was the bravest creature she'd ever met, or the most foolish. Both possibilities intrigued her. You understand, she said carefully, that I could destroy your entire planet with a thought. Jake nodded seriously. Yeah, the briefing mentioned that. Pretty impressive, actually. How's it work? Some kind of psychic thing, or do you have a really big laser? General Cothran made a strangled sound. No one had ever asked the Empress to explain her powers like she was demonstrating a kitchen appliance. It is complicated, Vexhara said, finding herself off balance. The power flows through neural pathways enhanced by quantum crystalline matrices. She stopped. Why was she explaining this? Cool, Jake said, genuinely interested. So it's like a biological supercomputer. That's way better than our stuff. The most advanced thing I work with is a GPS satellite. And half the time, it can't tell the difference between a Starbucks and a strip mall. They reached the coffee shop, and Jake held the door open for her. Vexhara stared at the gesture. In 3 centuries, no one had ever held a door for her. People built temples in her honor, wrote epic poems about her beauty, conquered worlds in her name, but no one had ever done something so simple and thoughtful. Inside the shop, Jake ordered 2 drinks, 1 large coffee, black, and one of those fancy caramel things with extra whipped cream. He told the barista, then turned to Vexhara. I figured you might like something sweet. Most people do when they're having a rough day. A rough day, Vexhara repeated. Well, yeah. You just traveled across the galaxy to meet us, and we're probably pretty disappointing compared to all those advanced civilizations you're used to. That's got to be frustrating. Vexhara accepted the drink, the first gift anyone had given her. In decades, that wasn't a tribute or a desperate bribe. She took a tentative sip and was surprised by how much she enjoyed the sweetness. You are not what I expected, she admitted. Jake grinned. Yeah, I get that a lot. My ex-girlfriend said I was aggressively normal. I'm still not sure if that was a compliment or not. And despite herself, despite 3 centuries of conquest and calculated cruelty, Empress Vexhara found herself smiling back, learning to foul over the following days. Something unprecedented happened in the Nexari Empire. Empress Vexhara delayed her conquest schedule. Her generals grew nervous, her advisors whispered among themselves, and her enemies across the galaxy wondered if she was finally showing weakness. But Vexhara wasn't weak. She was fascinated. Jake had somehow turned their diplomatic meetings into casual conversations. Instead of formal negotiations in sterile conference rooms, they found themselves walking through Central Park, sitting on park benches, feeding ducks. That completely ignored the fact that one of them could level mountains with her mind. The thing about humans, Jake was saying, tossing breadcrumbs to a particularly aggressive mallard. Is that we're really good at being wrong about stuff? Like, historically speaking, we've been wrong about almost everything at least twice. Vexhara watched him with growing confusion. And this is good. Well, yeah. Being wrong means you get to learn something new. Being right all the time sounds pretty boring. Actually, the Empress had never considered this perspective. The Nexari prized perfection above all else. Being wrong was a flaw to be corrected, not an opportunity to be celebrated. I am never wrong, she said automatically. Jake looked at her with something that might have been pity. That sounds awful. When's the last time you were surprised by something? Really surprised? Not just annoyed. Vexhara opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. She couldn't remember. Centuries of absolute power had made everything predictable. Victory was inevitable. Resistance was futile, and every day brought only confirmation of what she already knew. Yesterday, she said quietly, when you offered me coffee instead of surrender. Jake's face lit up. See, surprises are great. They mean the universe still has new stuff to show you. That evening, as Vexhara stood alone on her ship's observation deck, she found herself thinking about surprises, about the way Jake laughed at his own jokes, about how he treated her like a person instead of a goddess, about the strange warmth that had spread through her chest when he'd smiled at her. General Cawthron approached cautiously. My Empress, the fleet awaits your orders. Shall we begin the invasion? Vexhara was quiet for a long moment, watching Earth turn slowly below them. Such a small planet, so fragile and blue and utterly defenseless. It would take less than an hour to subjugate completely. Tell me, General, she said finally. Have you ever been wrong about something, my Empress? Wrong, mistaken, incorrect. In your assumptions. Cawthron looked confused. I strive always for perfection, my Empress. Error is weakness. Vexhara nodded slowly. She had believed that too, once. But now she wondered if perhaps the greatest error of all was never allowing yourself the possibility of being wonderfully, surprisingly wrong. The bow that conquered world's final meeting was supposed to be a formality. Vexhara would announce her terms, humanity would surrender, and another world would join her empire. That was how it had always worked. Instead, she found herself sitting across from Jake in the same coffee shop where this had all begun, staring into her caramel drink and trying to find words for feelings she'd never experienced. So, Jake said gently, what happens now? Vexhara had conquered 47 star systems. She had commanded fleets that could shatter moons, wielded power that made her nearly godlike. But she had never felt as vulnerable as she did in this moment, facing one ordinary human who had somehow turned her entire worldview upside down. I don't know, she admitted, and the honesty of it shocked her. For 3 centuries, I have known exactly what would happen next: victory, conquest, expansion. But now you're not sure. She looked up at him. This impossible man who had never tried to impress her or fear her or use her, who had simply treated her like someone worth knowing. You have changed me, she said quietly. I came here to conquer Earth, to add humanity to my collection of subjugated species. But you made me remember what it feels like to be surprised, to learn, to be wrong in ways that feel right. Jake reached across the small table and gently touched her hand. The gesture was so simple, so human, and it broke something inside her that had been frozen for centuries. I have ruled worlds, Vexhara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I have commanded armies and toppled civilizations, but I have never had someone make me laugh, or hold a door for me, or offer me coffee when I was having a difficult day. Those are pretty basic things, Jake said softly. Not to me, to me. They are miracles. And then, in a gesture that would have scandalized her empire and shocked the galaxy, Empress Vexhara, conqueror of worlds, master of 47 star systems, the most powerful being in known space, slowly stood and bowed to Jake Morrison. Not the formal bow of diplomatic protocol, but something deeper, a recognition of equals, an acknowledgement that power meant nothing without connection, that conquest was empty without understanding. I surrender, she said, and her words carried across the coffee shop like a prayer. Not my empire, not my fleet, but myself. to the possibility of being wrong, to the joy of being surprised, to you. Jake stood and, with characteristic human audacity, hugged the Empress of the galaxy. And as her forearms wrapped around him in return, Vexhara realized that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from making others bow, but from learning to bow yourself above them. The Nexari fleet quietly changed course, heading home with news that would reshape the galaxy. Their undefeatable Empress had been conquered, not by superior weapons or advanced technology, but by kindness, curiosity, and the radical act of treating someone as simply, wonderfully human.